Hi, hello, hey, how's it going? Monster Hunter. You know it, and presumably you love it. You picked up World on a whim because your friend said it was really good and had a grand old time sinking a bajillion hours into it and Iceborne, maybe played a little bit of Rise, and when your time with it had finally come to a close, you thought to yourself, damn, if only there was more. Well, never fear, for there are many other games in the series. Longtime fans of course know this, but each Mon Hun game does a pretty good job of feeling unique, for better or for worse. The developers do their damnedest to create an experience that feels fresh, be that with new monster designs, new weapon classes, or of course, with new gameplay gimmicks and mechanics. Iceborne brought the clutch claw, Rise has the wire bugs, Generations has arts and styles, just to name a few of the more recent ones. But there are few that are as divisive or game-changing as the third generation's very own underwater combat. Adored by some, hated by many, today I want to ask the question, was underwater combat really that bad? Let's talk about it, shall we? The underwater level. A staple of many games that can quickly take an experience from very good to very bad, and many folks have abandoned their adventures entirely when they arrive. There's just something about underwater movement, puzzles, and combat that has never really been terribly intuitive in video games as a whole. They tend to bring your movement to a screeching halt, they usually restrict your vision by making the environment dark or murky, and they usually bring in some form of breathing mechanic that often just feels like another arbitrary way to die when you've got other things you'd rather focus on. Some prime examples are just about any Mario title, Meridia and Super Metroid, the Labyrinth Zone in the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and of course, the Water Temple in the Ocarina of Time. Now, there's a handful of folks that most probably adore all these levels, but for the most part, they are pretty unanimously disliked. So what if a game developer were to come along and take a crack at some underwater gameplay in a game that just had no business doing so? Enter Capcom. As the hype was building towards the release of Monster Hunter Tri, an eagle-eyed fan may have noticed that a good chunk of the announcement trailer featured footage of the player duking it out beneath the ocean's surface. That's right, Capcom was taking the dive and trying their hand at underwater gameplay. But was it any good? Those of you who have seen my previous videos may already know my thoughts, but let's take a look at what Capcom did to approach this controversial space in video games, where people's grievances lie, and how it changed the Monster Hunter series as a whole. So, first things first, what did the underwater gameplay change? The gameplay itself was certainly different from anything the player base had experienced up to that point. All of a sudden there was a whole other dimension to battle monsters in. Capcom's choice to implement it came simply from a desire to include a more immersive and 360-degree feel to the hunts, essentially making more use of the Z-axis where they could. This was done in later entries by simply adding jumping and verticality to the maps, but back in 2009, swimming was the name of the game. The verticality gave hunters the opportunity to navigate around the monsters more freely, focusing on otherwise hard to reach body parts to break and dodging attacks by moving up and down. The monsters themselves, those that could swim at least, behaved differently as well, generally becoming much faster and more agile when underwater. On top of that, there was also the breathing meter, which honestly I forgot about at first because of how slowly it goes down. Your hunter can hold their breath for an impressively long time, and generally you end up popping your head above the water or accidentally swimming through air bubbles so often that it's almost never an issue. It certainly still suffers from the whole murky visuals and slower movement in pursuit of realism, but we'll touch on that in a moment. Next point, and a rather important point at that, is just how much of the game is underwater, because the way that some folks carry on about it, you'd think it was the entire game, but it certainly was not. The third generation consisted of 3 games, and of those 3, only 2 feature underwater combat. Not including arenas and final boss areas, only 2 maps featured water sections, those being the Deserted Island, or Mogul Woods, which had a total of 2 significant areas you could swim in, and the Flooded Forest, which was about half-half. On top of that, there's only a grand total of 6 large monsters that even dare venture beneath the waves, 10 if you want to count their variants. So all in all, there wasn't that much area dedicated to this brand new mechanic. Honestly, this was a great decision by Capcom. It would have been really easy to go ahead and design water areas and monsters for every single map and flaunt their brand new mechanic, but they chose to rein it in and avoid it becoming overpowering. So with all that clarified, what did people take issue with? Well, from what I can tell, it seems that many issues lie within a major factor of the previously mentioned games: slower, more sluggish movement. Now, I would argue there's a key difference between these other games and Monster Hunter, and that is that Monster Hunter isn't a platformer. It's not even really an action-adventure game either, and up until the point of the third generation, movement was never something that was a focus of the series. In fact, there's an argument to be made that Monster Hunter is intentionally sluggish and more realistic as a whole, and this is part of the appeal. Hell, a whole lot of the criticism surrounding Rise is how unrealistic and over the top the movement is, suggesting perhaps they may have strayed a little bit too far from the original Monster Hunter vision. Whatever your take is, I believe that the movement in the water segments aligns pretty well with the land-based movement. You have to be thoughtful and deliberate in the way that you navigate around the map and monsters, and this reflects in all aspects of the third gen. The second point I see made a lot is the camera and just general capabilities of the systems and controllers the games are on. And honestly, yeah, I can agree with this. Monster Hunter historically has pretty shocking camera control. I mean, for the first 2 generations, you had to play the games with your left index finger curled over onto the D-pad in what is known in the fanbase as the claw, because the control scheme and hardware limitations just sucked. So I can certainly agree with this take, especially for those who didn't have the luxury of a Circle Pad Pro on the 3DS. There's nothing to defend here, the camera blows. And last but not least, people just don't like being out of their element, and underwater combat is entirely that. Your attacks change, your movements change, the monster changes. It's all different. But I don't know, I just don't see how it's a bad thing. Adapting to changes in gameplay is probably the most core design focus of the entire Monster Hunter series. It's what keeps people coming back for more. Now, to be fair, I haven't gone back and mastered every weapon and tried them all in and out of water, so I can't speak for everyone. It sure does sound like some weapons got shafted. Look at you, Sword and Shield. And if that's the case for your main weapon, that sucks serious ass. But it has only served to fascinate me personally and motivate me to improve and adapt rather than wall me and stop me from progressing. What I can't concede, however, is that the underwater systems can at times feel under-designed and perhaps not thought entirely through. This goes for several factors, including the visual design of the underwater segments, the additional mechanics such as the breath bar, and just making the underwater monsters too damn good at their job. When it comes to the visual design of the underwater map segments, they just kind of feel bland at times. This goes mainly for the deserted island because the flooded forest and underwater ruin are pretty sweet atmospherically, but these areas don't feel particularly thought out or lived in like everywhere else in the map does. Monster Hunter does a good job of creating pretty intuitive maps, and maps that feel like they are a natural part of the world and like a real place. So when you dive beneath the waves and just see grey and blue and not a whole lot else, it is a little disappointing. Yes, this could be a product of the hardware limitations, but the point still stands. Now for the additional mechanics. Please allow me to air my grievances about the breath bar for just a moment. It just seems unnecessary in the setting of Monster Hunter. In a game that's more focused on exploration, it would make more sense to me because the idea is that you're given a time limit to find whatever the depth may hold in terms of items and other secrets, and that builds tension in gameplay. But in Monster Hunter, the whole point is that you submerge for an extended period of time to hunt the monster, and it simply serves to interrupt the otherwise smooth experience of the hunt on the rare occasion that you do actually run out of air. That being said, the resource diminishes so slowly that most of the time you don't have to worry about managing it at all. Odds are the combat will either take you to the surface or through the path of one of the air bubbles spawns just by the nature of the player dodging the monster and playing the game, and eventually you get the mask from Charger that just negates the need for it at all. Overall, it doesn't feel like it adds anything to the experience. It just feels like a holdover from every other underwater segment in every other video game, and it feels like it could just not be there without any negative impact. Alright, that's that rant over. Now, what do they mean by monsters being too good at their job? Well, Monster Hunter makes a point to bring back creatures from previous entries in newer titles in much the same way that Pokemon does, and to serve much the same purpose. It's a selling point. Fans have favorites. People like to see Zenoga and Nagakuga and Tigrex because that's a big part of what makes Monster Hunter Monster Hunter. The monsters you can fight underwater offered a far superior experience when swimming than they did on land. Lagiacrus, Plesioth, and Gobel are the clearest examples of this, along with Abyssal Lagiacrus, Cedius, and Diamorales, all requiring underwater combat to work at all, and this poses a problem for the future. What happens when you remove underwater from the game? Well, the answer is that you just kind of remove all of them from the game as well. Ludroth made it through because of where it sits in the difficulty scaling, and it really did pretty well on land anyway. But Gobel, Abyssal Lagi, both the Cedius and Diamorales haven't been seen since. Lagiacrus was a shadow of its former self in Gen 4, and Plesioth returned to being an absolute pain in the ass as it had been before Gen 3. Now, it is true that this is what makes Gen 3 so special and unique and worth going back to, and yeah, I can get behind that. But it just sucks that we were given the best way to experience these monsters, and it was later stripped away from us. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry if you're one of the 3 people in the world that have Gobel as their favorite monster. So with all of that said and done, let's wrap the video up, shall we? What's the answer to our question? Was underwater combat really that bad? I'd say both sides of the argument have some pretty valid points. The movement and the camera are not quite there, the environmental design is lacking, but it's just so damn cool. The underwater segments of Monster Hunter 3rd Generation are just so unique in all the right ways, and just enhance what few hunts take place in them. They're not bloated or overloaded or too abundant, they imbue an atmospheric feeling that few other gimmicks do in the series, and really innovated the gameplay in a fascinating new way. It led to further experimentation in future generations, as well as opened the door for the verticality of movement we see in the series to this day. It allowed for the introduction of some of the series' most iconic monsters such as Lagiacrus, Cedius, and Diamorales, and hell, it even made the Plesioth bearable. It was a positive, albeit temporary change to the series, and whilst it may not have been fully realised at the time, and would probably benefit from being revisited, I personally would be just as happy for it to remain the gimmick of Gen 3 and help it maintain its uniqueness. Say what you will, but I personally am firmly of the mind that underwater combat was not really that bad. In fact, it was pretty damn good. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. What are your thoughts on the underwater combat in Monster Hunter? Let me know down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have a friend that might like the video too, why not share it with them as well? If you have any interest in my more general thoughts on a range of topics, follow me over on Twitter @PigGinge, but for now, that will just about do it for me. Have a good one, and I will catch you on the next video. See you later.